The vast majority of life is unicellular. The entire organism consists of only one cell living independently, such as bacteria, amoebas, and many algae. And this is how life on Earth probably started out. But you, your dog, this mushroom, this tree, a crab, I, and almost any other life form you care to think of off the top of your head are what we call multicellular. They consist of a large number of cells that are specialized for different functions. This raises a question. How did we get from this to this? Scientists are still trying to figure out how exactly this came about, but we know that multicellularity evolved separately in plants, red algae, brown algae, fungi, and animals, although we're not sure when this happened for each of the groups. The problem is, they're all just too complex to study properly. Wouldn't it be nice if we had an organism which was in the process of becoming multicellular? Something which was at a point between the simple lifestyle of a unicellular organism and the complexity of a multicellular one. Enter Volvox, a genus of algae which is simply quite complex. Compared with the other multicellular groups we know, plants, animals, and so on, Volvox is a relatively latecomer to the party, with scientists estimating that it moved out of a single-celled lifestyle about 50 million years ago, around the time that mammals were really starting to hit their stride. Still, it took a while for Volvox to be noticed by humans. It was first observed by Antony van Leeuwenhoek in 1700. Van Leeuwenhoek spent a somewhat unhealthy amount of time looking through a microscope, but that did mean that he was the first to observe many things we know today, such as the single-celled organism. With regards to Volvox, which is surprisingly large for the things he was looking at, he wrote in a letter that
I had got the foresaid water taken out of the ditches and runnels on the 30th of August, and on coming home I was busy looking at the multifarious very little animalcules swimming in this water I saw floating in it, and seeming to move themselves a great many green ground particles of the bigness of sand grains.
Still, it was nearly 60 years before the green round particles that Van Leeuwenhoek observed would be named Volvox by Linnaeus, meaning fierce roller. At first, Volvox was considered to be a very primitive animal. Its role in science for the first century after its discovery was to finally get rid of the spontaneous generation theory. In fact, it wasn't until Haeckel showed up in the mid-1800s that it came to be considered the model for examining the evolution of multicellularity. Haeckel may not have been a very good scientist, as he fiddled with the data that he was collecting, and he may have thought the Volvox was the first multicellular animal, with all others having evolved from it, but at least he recognized that we had something to learn from it. Finally, it was August Wiseman in the late 1800s who gave Volvox its rightful place not as the first animal, but one which worked as a model for how the others had evolved. He wasn't right about everything, but at least he put Volvox in the place that it holds to this day. Let's take a look at your standard Volvox alga. An average individual looks like a ball of thousands of little dots, around 2,000 of them in fact. These dots are the non-reproductive body cells, the somatic cells. These are the cells which do the actual swimming and responding for the organism as well as producing food, and we'll focus on them firstly. As well as the usual features you find in cells, like the nucleus for housing DNA, the chloroplast for producing food, and mitochondria for turning that food into energy the cell can use, the somatic cells have two major features that are important for the Volvox. First, we have the eye spot, a red patch on the surface of the cell, which allows the cell to see where the light is. Much like how our eyes allow us to see where food is, so that we can eat it, the eye spots allow Volvox to see light so its chloroplast can make as much food as possible. The eye spots are how we tell which part of the ball is the front and which is the back. On a human, this would be the head at one end and the feet at the other. It so happens that the eye spots at the front of the alga are larger and more sensitive than the eye spots at the back, if indeed these cells have any at all. The back end of the sphere is also heavier as the cells are closer together, and so is therefore always pointing downwards, allowing the front end to point upwards to where the sunlight usually is. Secondly, they also have these two tails, or flagella. They are what do the actual pushing of the water to move the sphere, usually pushing water from the front towards the back in such a way that produces this rolling motion that gives Volvox its name. Zooming out a bit, the somatic cells are surrounded by the extracellular matrix, a clear glue made primarily of sugary protein. There are several layers to the extracellular matrix, but the important bit is the one that fills up the sphere of cells, known as the deep zone. This web of protein is what holds all the cells of the sphere together and keeps the reproductive cells in place. It is also what sets multicellular Volvox apart from its colonial and unicellular cousins, and it is quite similar to the extracellular matrix seen in plants and animals, which is important for communication of body processes. Finally, we have the reproductive cells, which are these big green blobs we see hanging out in the extracellular matrix. There's usually around 16 of these, and they are there to make new Volvox spheres, which, in terms of evolution, makes them the most important cells in the whole organism, because it means the alga is able to make more algae and spread through the algae world that is probably a pond. Now, those tails and eyes need to be used for something, and that something is moving into the light, because that's really what they want to do. It's how they get their food. But how do they do this? The eye spots on the surface of the sphere sense light. Without going into the whole biochemistry of it, this is how it works. The eye spot receives the light falling on it, and then sends a signal to open the floodgates, letting in a wave of calcium. The flagella on the cells which have detected light will then respond to this wave of calcium and will briefly change their paddling behavior in different ways depending on the species. Some start paddling in the opposite direction, and others will stop paddling altogether, much like a team of rowers on a ship. When all the rowers are pushing in the same direction, the ship will move forward, but if one side of the ship stops rowing or starts paddling in the opposite direction, the ship will very quickly start turning around. It's important to note that the cells don't actually communicate with each other, they just sense the light individually and act accordingly. Next we'll have a look at how Volvox make a new Volvox. The reproduction of Volvox is the most important clue that we have for examining its evolution. How this works is rather complicated and biologists are still trying to figure it out, but there are a few key steps, and they happen for all 16 of the reproductive cells at about the same time. The reproductive cell starts to grow, and then it divides, forming 2 cells. This happens 3 more times until the embryo is a ball of 16 cells. At this point, the cells form a hollow sphere and arrange themselves so that there is a cross-shaped hole at one end. That will be needed in the next stage. One more division occurs, so that there are 32 cells. The next round of division happens a little strangely. Up until now, the cells have been dividing symmetrically, that is, both new cells are the same size. In 16 of these cells, they divide asymmetrically, so that one is bigger than the other. The bigger ones will go on to become new reproductive cells, while the little ones will go on to form swimming somatic cells. The large cells will divide asymmetrically 2 or 3 more times before settling, while the rest of the cells divide 5 or 6 more times, forming a ball of 2,000 to 4,000 cells. The embryo is then ready to move on to the next stage. Second, sphere inversion. The problem the growing embryo now faces is that it's inside out. The eye spots are on the inside, and the new reproductive cells are on the outside. Conveniently, there is that hole at one end of the sphere allowing it to be fixed. First, the cells immediately around the hole elongate so that they end up in a somewhat flask shape. Then, the points of these flask cells move together and forces the wider end of the cells to roll around the point where the cells meet. This continues on down the line of cells until the first cells can make contact with the cells on the other side of the sphere. The ball is then complete. This part of the process is particularly useful when we're studying evolution, as this sort of movement isn't just unique to Volvox. A similar sort of process occurs in the very early development of animals, and although it's unlikely to be exactly the same, it may provide some clues as to where they came from. Third, growth and hatching. Once the growing Volvox is the right way round, it has to bulk itself up. At the moment, it looks like a football that's lost some of its hair, but almost as soon as it turns itself right side out, it starts producing that sugary protein goop that makes up most of the sphere's volume. The extracellular matrix is also laid down between cells so that they move apart from each other, much like the spots on this balloon. Partway through the bulking up, the swimming cells immediately around the new growing Volvox decide that they need to get out of the way so that they can leave. They start wriggling about, trying to break free of their own matrix and tumble away. When there is a hole big enough, the new Volvox can leave and continue to grow. Now there is just a hole left in the parent, meaning that this whole process ultimately leads to a falling apart. Once the new alga has reached full size a few days later, it will swim about for a few hours before its own reproductive cells start dividing. Volvox is a pretty important creature as far as algae go. but it's not important for your usual reasons, like making money, food, or some sort of genetically enhanced super creature that we have to call in superheroes to save us from. No, Volvox is important for a different reason. It has helped us and continues to help us discover how it is that cells came to move beyond swimming about in their own little patch of pond, and decided to work together, forming everything from Volvox to a flower, to a mushroom, to a bird, to you and me. As Julian Huxley said way back in 1912, in some colony like Volvox, there once lay hidden the secret of the body and the mind of man. And to me, that's pretty amazing. If you want to go back over any of the sections again, just click on the words here or links down below. There's also references down there, as all good scientists must provide. Goodbye.